Plum, you were here in 1972 and you're actually one of the first Loyalist prisoners brought to Long Kesh.
Yeah.
Tell us a wee bit what that was like.
Well, it was a culture shock because most of the prisons in Northern Ireland were all cellular system type, old Victorian style prisons. So this became like a prisoner of war camp. So it was a culture shock actually to come into this style of prison, but I thought at the time that it was better than the cellular system.
And Long Kesh was used at the time. This was actually a disused RAF base.
Yes, it was a disused RAF base, and the first prisoners in here were actually internees. They were the first people to come down here, and then it started in October '72. They brought all the convicted prisoners from Crumlin Road because of the overcrowding. They brought them down into these compounds, and they built more compounds to accommodate that.
They actually just came for you in the middle of the night?
Yeah, in the middle of the night in Crumlin Road prison, about 2 o'clock in the morning, the army and police just open the cells and give you a black bag and just says, right, pack your gear, you're going to Long Kesh. They had a convoy from Crumlin Road prison right down to here, of all Loyalist and Republican prisoners were all brought down here at the one time.
It's very basic accommodation. It's a 1940s building. What was it like to actually live in it?
Well, it was rough at the time. Number one, the cold. You know, they only had convector heaters in here and heat escape through the tin huts, you know. So the coldness got at the beginning. Also, it was hard to adjust with being in a cell and all of a sudden you're seeing like a dormitory style thing and you had all these people.
And in fact, it was used, for training purposes, you could say. I mean, there was a lot of terrorist training that went on here.
I mean, there was no education system down here. There was very little for prisoners to do. So in order to keep people's interest, you know, the command structure at that time says, okay, well, let's give people weapons training, explosive training, and all guerrilla tactics.
I mean, effectively, it was a government-sponsored training camp.
To some extent, yes, originally because people had nothing else to do. And then when we got the education system up running and different things like that, people went on to do degrees, you know, and all that was stopped. All the weapons trainings and things like that were all stopped, you know.
And apparently there's actually one ex-prisoner who trained on an Open University course is now teaching maths in Cambridge University.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think we had something like 12 prisoners actually graduated down here. We intended to use the prison system in a positive way. When you come into prison, you either let the prison beat you or you beat the system. And we were constantly trying to beat the system down here all the time.
Okay, well, let's go and have a look inside the hut then.
There's 2 toilets here and 1 sink for something like 30-odd prisoners. You have 2 beds, 2 prisoners in each cubicle. Originally this was just an open hut, everybody crammed in. This gave you some type of privacy, like, you know, but again you're still in a communal setting because you had 2 toilets. Plus you had to clean the place. You had to make sure the place was kept clean because of disease. And also we had a problem with these lights because what they had in here was industrial lights that you would work in a factory. And that tended to hurt your eyes. Being a communal thing and everybody being in here, you had to have certain rules about noise, when the lights went out, when people settled down to sleep and all. So you had to have all those rules, but they were our self-imposed rules, you know.
So what time was lights out?
12 o'clock at night, lights was out. There used to be they didn't let you have a TV in the accommodation. The TV was in the canteen. Some of our prisoners were very genius, you know, with working with different things, and they actually built a false TV. We were able to leave the false TV in the canteen, sneak the real TV in here and watch the television. And the prison officers thought the TV was still in the canteen, but it wasn't, it was a false one, which had been made by the prisoners. We had a guy, he was an electrician, and you know, we had our own transmitter, radio transmitter, where we could transmit messages outside. We had our own soldering iron, and there was actually a tunnel dug down at the bottom cubicle, because at that time, this was the last compound. Once you got out there, you were free, but the tunnel collapsed, but then so it got caught on. Obviously there was no alcohol, so like at Christmas times and other festive periods, you know, we used to make potching.
And where was that? Where would that have been kept? In here? Actually in here?
Well, it was very ingenious because you had a tea boiler, which was used to make tea, to smelt with the shower pipes, and also used drains outside, and we run it from the toilets into the sink. So that was your cooling system.
Yeah.
You see, so coming up to July, where the Oilers would have celebrated the 12th, you know, we would have been on overtime. You know, get the drink ready, or Christmas, you had been on overtime. But that's the only time we did it, was it in those periods, like.
And what did it actually taste like?
Lovely. No, it was good. It was good stuff, yeah. You know,
It would have been very potent, obviously. I mean, it would have been.
Oh yeah, I mean the poaching was potent, like, you know, and as I say, we only done it in festive times because you couldn't. If you drank that stuff every week, you know, you'd never got out of here. We found it was very hard to hide things in these huts because, you know, it's not like an ordinary prison. There's no nooks or crannies here, so it's very hard to hide stuff. So we came up with this ingenious idea to hide the poaching right under their noses. We had been watching the French Connection, the film The French Connection, where they had drugs in these tins of food. So we came up with the idea that about the tin of Coke, a tin of Fanta, we put a hole in the tin, drained the Fanta and Coke out, and then we injected the poaching into the tins, used a soldering iron to seal it up, and then we just had a tin of Fanta or a tin of Coke, but it was actually a tin of poaching. So, you know, we got away with that for years. You know, the screws used to come in to search, and all the seen was tins of Coke and tins of Fanta, but they're actually tins of poaching.
Well, obviously a very compact little unit for two men here.
Yeah, when you put two beds in here, two bunk beds in here, and two prisoners, there's not much room left. So I mean, you had one locker each. So when you put the two beds in and one locker in each, I mean, the place was cramped. But you tried to make it as homely as possible, you know. And this was our fridge, the window. You used to have a window box out here, and your milk or anything to keep it fresh, you had to set it outside. That was your fridge.
So how long were you actually in here?
4 years.
And you would have got to know the place very well. It would have become like home for you.
Oh yeah. We were on the lines of a prisoner work camp. So every morning everybody had to be up out of their bed at 8 o'clock. They had to clean out their cubicles because health was very significant. Because you're in a communal setting, you have to keep the place clean. So everybody had to clean their own place out every morning. First, go and wash and shave, keep their own personal health thing, and then we would have had a muster parade, similar to what you would have had in a prisoner work camp. We would have had education classes after that, or different types of sports and all.
Would that have been between the huts, or?
Between the huts and all, between compounds, we had even a cup. So there was a lot of activities, but we had to fight for them. Originally there was nothing here. You had to keep people's minds active. Mm-hmm. You couldn't let people just lay about and get depressed and things like that there, which some people would have done. So we had the strict thing of you had to get up every morning, you had to clean your place, you had to do this, you had to do that there, and that kept people active, you know. What
way did visits work then?
Well, visits obviously were highlight of the week where you're meeting your parents, but the van would have come up to your gate and they would have called your name. You actually had to travel half a mile to the visiting place, and then your family would have been brought in to visit you. Originally it was an open plan system, but then we argued and negotiated for a more private thing, so we got private cubicles for each visit, you know.
And how long did each visit last, and what way did it work?
Half an hour. And in those days at the beginning, like, it was half an hour was a half an hour, you know, no matter what.
So that was it, half an hour once a week?
Half an hour once a week.
It's not a lot, really.
No, it wasn't. And as I say, once the half hour was up, that was it. There was no extensions. You have 3 accommodation huts, and you have one for a canteen. You've got your ablutions for your showers and your study hut. So you had 2 loyalist compounds, with UVF, UDA, and then you had the stickies, and then you had the provisional prisoners in the York compound. So it was mixed, you know. Mm-hmm. And you know, we used to walk around, and I mean, I learnt Irish here, actually in here, sitting at the wire. A Republican prison sitting on the other side of the wire, and I got the Fania glass in here.
Because basically there was a no conflict policy in here.
Yeah, you had a no conflict policy. No matter what happened outside, didn't pertain to the inside.
I understand, but I mean, with the location here in the maze, you had quite a good view of live racing, I believe.
Yeah, well, we used to stand on the top of this hut, what's the reason? You know, but we had a bookmakers and all in here. The bookmaker actually was over in one of these compounds over here, so to get your bet done, we had tennis balls with a slit in them. You wrote your bet and put your money in the tennis ball, and then you threw it over the wire to the other compound. And on occasions, like, you know, we had us Republicans to throw it on to the bookie in the other compound, you see. So there was, see, things were coming at us, people. Yeah. People work together on, you know. Mm-hmm. But it was amazing to see that there, you know.
Well, Sean, we're now in the heart of the hospital here, and this is obviously where the hunger strikes took place. Obviously, you know, a very emotive place for you.
Yeah, oh, it is, undoubtedly. Particularly the cell number 8, which is where Bobby Sands died.
Quite an atmosphere, Sean, even now here.
For me personally, it's a very emotional place to be. This is where his life ended. My last memory of Bobby Sands was climbing into the back of a prison van shortly before he embarked on his hunger strike. We were in H3. He had explained to a prison governor that he wanted to go and talk to the OCs of the various blocks, telling them that the hunger strike was over, meaning the first hunger strike. But what he was actually doing was telling the OCs of the relevant blocks that he was about to embark on his hunger strike. So my last memory of him is him climbing into the back of the prison van with a clenched fist as he climbed on up into, and that was the last I've seen him. But yes, this is a place that holds a lot of memories for me. Anyone who was convicted of a scheduled offence after the 1st of March 1976 was a criminal. So if you were convicted of an offence that occurred before, you were a political prisoner. So there was the criminalisation policy coming in. So the first blanket protester, Kieran Nugent, had said the only way they're going to put a prison uniform on me is if they nail it to my back. So he effectively was the first protesting Republican prisoner, in that he refused to wear a prison uniform, and there was no other option other than hunger strike for Bobby Sands, and obviously his 9 comrades who lost their lives.
Can you give us a sense of what it was like for the other prisoners, for the other Republican prisoners, while this was going on here in this hospital block? I mean, this became a place of death, really.
It was a very like a subdued atmosphere among all the prisoners, and there were many attempts by prison officers to try and goad Republicans into arguments or baiting them, if you like, with various comments that they would make. Although there was good camaraderie amongst all the prisoners, and they were very close, it was really difficult and hard to explain what way you were feeling at that time.
I mean, when our first prisoners were convicted after March 76, they refused to wear prison clothes as well, because they had the same objectives as Republicans. But the difficulty we had was we weren't getting support from our own community, because we were seen to be supporting Republican prisoners. So we were caught in that catch-22 position. So it ended up we had to stop a protest. We could fight for those objectives as long as it wasn't the same style of campaign as Republicans, so we couldn't be connected. And that's a difficulty we had all over the years, you know, the prison system. And what we were always afraid of was being airbrushed out of the equation. For instance, internment. I mean, nobody mentions about loyalists being interned, yet loyalists were interned. So we did pay a price too.
So it's obviously going to be a case of, as in all balance matters, Northern Irish getting the balance right.
Yeah.
This is the soldier's view of the camp. Probably some sort of machine gun mount here, Plum.
The time I remember is when the Republican prisoners escaped from Mountjoy prison by helicopter. And the next morning when we got up and come out of our huts, the machine guns mounted pointing into the camp, and every watchtower right round the camp, more or less to say, like, you know, to betray not here, because we'll think, but that's what they used those for. It was as much to protect the prison from attack as it was for prisoners to escape, you know, because people could have maybe launched or helped to escape from the outside as well as inside.
With blanket prisoners, they would have walked to their visit. You know, so in the event of, say, for example, a blanket prisoner attacking a screw, you know, here they were going to see it.
The shift systems could be quite lax here as well. I mean, there were times when the towers, the inner towers, weren't even manned.
In the early years of the camp, I would say that there was soldiers here all the time. But as time went on, you know, to man every tower, especially when the prison got bigger and bigger and bigger, you know, was impossible. Human nature tells you, you know, if you're sitting up here for a couple of hours, you'll maybe nip down, go to the toilet, you'll nip down for a cup of tea or something like that. In later years, I mean, prison officers, you know, it was a job to them, just wanted to get their day in.
I remember one prison officer in particular who produced, on one occasion, £100 note from his wallet, and he had said to us, "Do you see that?" He says, "That's what I'm here for. I'm here for the money." And the problem is, some of the other prison officers here have never ever seen that type of money, and the only thing they know to do with that type of money is drink it. Whereas for me, it's for my family. That's what he was saying, you know. So, and we certainly seen evidence of it. We've seen them and smelt it. Many of occasion, you know, you dread it after the lunch hour period because they were off to the club of it. So there were somewhere in the region of 5 clubs on this camp for a booze up, and it could have been on the booze right through maybe 2, 3 in the morning, getting up, coming on here, and you smelt the drink off them in the morning.
I mean, they couldn't go anywhere because they were afraid of being shot dead. So they were like the police, drank with their own kind. They drank in the safety of inside the prison, where they had their own social clubs. They were as much a prisoner here, actually, as us, you know. The only thing is that they had access to the money and drink, and they can go out whatever they could, like, you know, but none of them were just like us.
This is the army perspective, and we're now going to go and have a look at the control room where the prison officers themselves could see and control every facet inside the prison.
Well, obviously, prisoners never got to see this part. This was the nerve centre of the whole prison.
Obviously, we've got the banks of video screens here then.
Yeah.
Cameras everywhere throughout the prison. But would you have been aware of the sort of level of security? I mean,
you expected that anyway, you know. I mean, you expected that they were watching it at every opportunity, you know.
And also the helicopter would have flown back and forward across the camp on a regular basis, trying to detect tunnels, etc. You have your live monitor and your freeze monitor. So if there was something that sort of appeared on a screen, they could lift it off the live screen, take it over onto the freeze screen and enhance it so that they could see a wee bit more clearly.
We were very careful what we said in the visits because we assumed that we were being bugged, you know, in the visits.
Always work on the assumption, even that your conversation is being recorded or that someone's listening. In relation to protesting prisoners, for example, on visits, they would take appeal visits, which give them an extra 15 minutes per month outside of their scheduled half-hour visit. If you mentioned anything that wasn't strictly relating to your appeal, your visit was terminated. And on one occasion, there was a woman up visiting a Republican prisoner, and she happened to say, "Oh, it's snowing out there, look at the snow." And the screw stopped and he says, "End of visit, that doesn't relate to your appeal," and stopped the visit. So that's how strict things were, the policy that was in place then.
How was information passed between prisoners of a sensitive nature then, on paper, or how was it done?
Information was passed. There was information passed from block to block in Gaelic, where you had what was known as scorchers. And basically they were people who would shout information from one block to another at night. And there was also comms that was carried out in the mouth. and it was passed in a kiss from one to another, to a female, obviously, and that's how information was passed out and went out, and then it came back in again. But sometimes that was a slow process, so there may have been hospital visits manufactured by different parties in different blocks to maybe try and even use some friendly orderlies in order to carry information from block to block. Innovation was the order of the day.
Well, in the early days, we had a TV engineer who was a prisoner, and he made a transmitter, and we smuggled parts in from outside to make a transmitter. Then we set up a number of codes, and we were able to transmit the people outside. And one of the codes we had was a circular piece of paper with A, B, A, C, D, all different letters of the alphabet on different rows. So you give coordinates, 17 and D, 18, and you change them about every week. Then we had a semaphore system. You used to start on top of the huts and use the old semaphore system, but we changed the code every day.
This is an airlock. You come in through these gates and there's a screw opens the gate, then locks these gates behind you and then opens these gates and allows you to go on up to the block. The blanket protesters didn't have vans for transport, and we're glad that they didn't, because they were glad of the exercise. So they would have walked from here to the visit.
Well, we're now inside the H block. We're in the actual sort of centre of the H, which was known as the circle.
Yeah, where obviously the whole block was controlled from. You have the control room, you have the officers' mess, you have the governor's room, you have the MO's room, you have a welfare room.
Okay, well, let's go and have a look at the accommodation, so to speak.
This grill wasn't here when I was here. Had the grill would have just come through, and you would have had a screw who would have been sat here, and he would have controlled access to both wings, A and B. You then went through this gate and into another airlock, just here. And so we've just come out of one airlock. You would have been allowed into the wing to here, where there's another grill. Would have met you here, so you were effectively inside another airlock. It then depended on the screw from this wing to come and open the airlock and allow you in through here. So that was you then back on the wing, and this screw used to shout to this screw, "one on," so that he would alter his numbers in the class office here. So a count was kept at all times, prisoners going off and coming on the wing.
It was one off, one on.
You heard that sort of shout all the time?
That was all the time, you know.
At night time, the screws used to come around and do a count, and you had control of your own lights in the cell, but also the screws could override the control of the lighting system. So it was best that you had your light on at all times when the screws were coming around to do a check, because if you had your light off, then they may have worked on the assumption that you wanted it off, and just to be, obviously, for a little bit of harassment, they would have turned the light on. So you kept your light on at all times when they were coming and doing their count. And behind this door, there would be a number of switches where they can control the lights from here. So that more or less kills your light entirely. Whereas if they want to come around and view your light off from inside, they can switch your light on and override the lighting in there, check through the door to see that there's a prisoner or two prisoners in the cell, and these weren't put down lightly, they were bang, 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 bang all the way down the wing. These doors, when they're open, you would be able to lock them back against the wall. And because the orderlies were trying to keep the blocks clean, this was brass, so it acted as a mirror. So if you were looking here, you could look effectively in the mirror and see who was down the wing. You know, so this was put on to stop you communicating here. But there was always a ways around it. So if you wanted, say for example, to pass something from this side of the wing to this side of the wing, what you done was you took a thread out of the blanket, you tied it to a button, you put the button at the bottom of the door, and you had it a thump across, and it would have shot under the door on the other side. So therefore you could have passed tobacco or whatever, comms, as in a communication, across to the other wing. So I mean, there was for everything that they put in place, there was always a way to get around it. These blocks were constructed as prefabs, so they were set in sections. So it was worked out how to grip the sections to set them in, and what they discovered was that there were like 4 holes in each panel that was set in. So they discovered that these panels had been sort of just basically a bit of plaster put in them and smoothed over. So very quickly they discovered that if they beat at these bits of plaster, that they would get a hole in the wall. So therefore that's what they had. They had a line of communication right down the wing, and that was my first experience when I came into this block H6 on remand.
Sean, the actual maze escape itself began on the wings here.
Yeah.
Could you just talk us through what happened?
There were a number of prisoners who had developed relationships with the screws, and it caused problems with other prisoners because some of the prisoners thought they were going a wee bit soft, you know, because they were getting very, very close to the screws over a period of time. So the organisation that went into the escape had been going on for months and months and months. They were developing the charm offensive. There were 2 screws in the wing, and when the signal came from the circle, which was, is that bumper in there? A bumper is something that you use to clean the floors. The prisoners in the wing then arrested, as it's phrased, the screws. And it was basically so as they couldn't hit the panic buttons to alert the authorities, and if you stop the screws sort of from hitting the button, they were taken basically prisoner by the prisoners. They were stripped of their uniforms, and the prisoners then put their uniforms on, and that's how the escape began. But the signal that came in from the circle is that bumper in there. It was said loud enough for someone at the other side in the other 2 wings to hear it. So when that signal was given, the 4 wings at the one time went and arrested all the screws in the block. There was a number of orderlies in the circle, and it was their role obviously to get very close to the screws, and so close that obviously some of them knew what was about to happen. They were going to find it difficult to take these people prisoner, or indeed hurt them should the need arise. So the orderlies, Republican prisoners who were in the circle, took. There were a number of handguns that had been smuggled in the prison for the escape. There were a small caliber handgun, and there were a number of wooden guns as well, to create the impression that there were many arms. So they took control in the officers' mess, and they had wait then on the food lorry arriving into the yard. Because once the food lorry came into the yard to deliver the meals, that was basically their meal ticket out to go out in the van. So there were 38 prisoners went out in the back of the van. Well, on the van, there were a number of prisoners in the front of the van who had a gun trained on the driver of the vehicle. There's a number of talks going in relation to the escape throughout various venues throughout the island of Ireland, and it's a number of prisoners who were actually on the escape who speak about their whole role in the escape, with obviously a PowerPoint presentation as to how it was done.
Was it an individual who actually came up with the plan for the escape, or how did the plan itself become formulated?
Republican prisoners are always trying to escape from the cages right down here into the blocks. So there was always a number of ideas floating around as to how you could escape. from the blocks. So it's not that an individual prisoner came up with the plan, because there were so many aspects to the escape that had to be covered. You've seen the journey that we have made on the way in here. I mean, to try and walk out of here, you're left, right, so you don't really know the layout. So they had to get the layout of the prison. They had to time everything to perfection. Because there were shifts that were happening, there were screws coming on, there were screws going off, obviously off duty, and they had to time it right, so that nothing seemed to miss. You know, and every so often, obviously, there's phone calls made to the various blocks for maybe the administration of the blocks or maybe inquiries and stuff. So they had to be sure that when phones were answered, that they knew what they were saying. The meticulous plan did it, and there were discussions. And when the escape started to occur, there were prisoners in the block who hadn't a notion what was going on. You know, so tight was the detail of it kept. So when the 38 went and eventually did get as far as the gate, there were a number of cars left with keys in them for them to get into, obviously, to make their getaway. And then the remainder of the 38 were left sort of to fend for themselves, as it were. You know, so if you think about the lorry coming in, how they were going to get the lorry, how they were going to get the driver, let him carry the food in, how they were going to get back to the gate again. And once they got to the gate, then there was another large-scale operation going on there, because screws were starting to come on duty, and you had a prisoner dressed in a prison officer's uniform. He was actually getting very meticulous. The screws had to show their passes coming in, and he was checking their passes, and he was saying, that doesn't look like you. And he didn't even have the keys to open the gate, you know. And obviously the other prisoners who were watching this guy, checking the screws coming in, were saying, why doesn't he just let them on in? Because they were kind of panicking. He was getting very officious doing the job that he was doing. Then the signal was given for everyone to go from the front gate, and a number of prisoners were to remain behind and keep the screws hostage that they had in the tally lodge. And what happened was they tried to overpower the prisoners, so everybody ran, made good their escape. And the Brit in the tower was watching the whole thing, but he seen basically what he was looking down at was screws fighting amongst themselves, because the prisoners had prison officers' uniforms on them. So he was up in the tower, obviously, with his weapon, but he didn't know what was going on. He thought the screws had just lost the plot. So everyone then started to run. The aftermath of the escape, where a lot of prisoners were brutalised then as a result. A lot of them were savaged by dogs and stuff that were brought in. They thought the prison was basically escape-proof. I think they had described it at one point as being the most secure prison in Europe. And the IRA, Republican prisoners, obviously made a myth of that, you know. So it was a huge morale boost for not only for the Republican prisoners who were in the blocks, but also for Republicans outside, because it did leave a lot of people with egg on their face. To this day, there are prisoners who are obviously becoming part of the Good Friday Agreement, and they're described as the OTRs. The on the runs, you know. So there are a number of prisoners who were never ever captured, you know, and what prisoners did escape obviously went back into the campaign again as well.
Well, we're on the wing here, Sean. Let's go down and have a look at one ourselves.
Yep. I walked into the cell, and a voice came from under the bed and said, "Who's that?" And I went down and under the bed, and there was a hole in the wall, which was here, and it was Tommy Gorman. Tommy was in the next cell, and he had said, "What have you got?" And I had said, "Well, we've got beds, we have a locker and a chair." And from what we had left in the crumb, it was actually quite nice, I thought. And he said, "Well, hit the bell, which is just here on the wall, and tell the screws that nobody else in the wing has got beds. You don't want to be any different." I pushed the bell, the door opened, and there was a PO stand. And he had said, "What is it?" And I had said, "Well, nobody else in the wing has got beds, and we don't want to be any different." And he more or less mimicked what I had just said. Nobody else. And next thing I remember was getting hit, and I come flying back on my head, hit these pipes. My feet went up in the air, and I was trailed out of the cell. I went down that way along a gauntlet of screws, and I ended up in a cell to the right. On the bottom of this wing, but there was a terrible, terrible smell in the cell. There was no lights in the cell, the lights were out. I was no sooner into the cell than the door opened again, and the same process was repeated. I was dragged up the wing again by the feet and into another cell, and again what I remember was the smell because it was in the summer, the smell of the rotten food, decaying food that had been scraped into the corner. And I eventually ended up in a cell that I was to stay in. And there was a young fella had come up along with me, and he and I ended up in the same cell together. And we were checking each other to see what the extent of our injuries were. There were somewhere in the region of, I think, between 8 and 12 prisoners brought to the block, H6 on that night, distributed to different wings. And that was your welcoming party, if you like, or start as you mean to continue. Because what we were told in the circle by the PO was that when we come down the wing, we would meet many jailhouse lawyers, but I'm the boss of this block, is what he had said. So he basically came round to reaffirm his position. They're not a very big cell, as you can see. I think it's 5 paces from here to here. I haven't paced it, but I'll try it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As a young person, because I was 18 when I came in here, as a young man coming in here, before I got here, I was saying to myself, how much of this is propaganda in terms of what they're saying about the H blocks, and how much is reality? You know, and I'm saying, well, maybe so much of it could be propaganda, as there is in all wars. But when I come in here, I remember standing here saying to myself, this is 1978, this can't be happening. To many young people, it would be a lifetime away. Well, them was the present, and that's what I remember saying to myself, this is 1978, and people can't be living in these conditions. And it very quickly come home to me that obviously everything that was being said in relation to the blocks and the conditions that we were living in wasn't propaganda, but was reality.
People who served time in the compound system, where we controlled and had our own regime, left prison less bitter. They had their own clothes, they didn't do any menial prison work, and they were able to do education programmes and things like that there. And we found the compound system very constructive, the way it was. But when the criminalisation policy came in, we found that none of our prisoners were doing education classes, none of them were doing, you know, the normal things that they'd done in the compound. And as a result of that, I mean, you'll find even among prisoners, there's a difference between compound men and H-block men, because H-block men came through a completely different regime. For instance, the dirty protest prisoners are a separate. They would have a different affinity than the ones that was in the compounds because of the different system. And I think it had a negative effect in the process outside, because prisoners were coming out of here very bitter, you know, particularly in the H-block system, you know, whereas the compound men were coming out, getting on with their lives, getting the jobs and whatever, etc., you know. So, I mean, that whole period of criminalisation that the NIO said about, I mean, I think done more detriment than what about positive stuff, you know.
A lot of the prisoners who went through the H-block system found a lot of what they suffered here hard to talk about. You know, and there's a lot has yet to come out. A lot of prisoners obviously would have a lot of difficulties talking about some of their experiences here, because it wasn't unusual for you to be in a cell here and the screws come and do a search, and for you to hear your friends screaming down the wing as a result of beatings that they were taking, you know. And it's one thing to get a beating when you sort of have your clothes on. It's an entirely different thing to be beaten when you're naked. You know, when you're taken from this cell. For example, what they used to do when they were doing cell searches, they used to search you even though you were naked. They used to search you, so they used to one out and one in, and there used to be 2 screws in here with one prisoner, you know, and you were standing outside naked with other screws who used to sort of eye you up and down and degrade you, you know, and you felt degraded, and that was the purpose of it. And you used to hear what was going on in the cell with your cellmate, and you knew what was going to happen next was that he was going to come out and that you were going in to get the same treatment. Your urine pot was kept in the corner here, and it was up to you to keep that pot empty at all times, empty it out the window, because the first thing that the screws done when they come in was lift the pot and throw it round your bedding, you know, so you kept the piss out the window. And the smell of alcohol was always something that sort of sticks with me. The smell of alcohol in the small confines of this small space, that I could always smell alcohol off screws, you know. So what part did that play in the treatment that they handed out to a lot of the prisoners here, you know. So as a young person coming in here who hadn't really got much of a sense of politics, I very, very quickly became politicised in here, because what was being implemented, in my opinion, was British administration. And if I didn't have a problem before with how the British were administering my rights, as it were, than I did have now. And I very, very quickly then became bitter.
Well, you obviously must have had a problem to start with, otherwise you wouldn't have been in the IRA and you wouldn't have been put in prison. You know, I mean, you can't really say the regime totally, you know, created you.
Well, let me explain to you where I come from here. As a young person of 16, 17 years of age, I was beaten off a street corner by a policy that the British government had introduced, because it was assumed then that every young person who was standing on a street corner was gathering intelligence, either on a patrol passing or maybe counting how many weapons they had. And for long enough that happened, because like most young people nowadays, all I wanted to do was stand and have a drink. I had no conception of history. I had no interest in the conflict, and I was beaten that often and I was harassed that often that I decided to become a member of the IRA.
If you were taking the beatings, you may as well be in it.
Well, that's the way it was, you know, and many of my friends who ended up in these blocks ended up coming in here not knowing the first thing about the history of the country in terms of what had happened many, many years ago, because I don't come from a Republican family. My father and my mother certainly weren't Republican. So I'm a creation, if you like. The British government created that in that sense. A lot of young people, going back into my day, found themselves reacting against the policy that was being implemented within various areas, Catholic areas.
Prison's never meant to be a pleasant place, but obviously a lot of things that went on were outside the law and shouldn't have gone on, whatever the political motive behind them.
There was a lot of them. There's a lot of things that went on in here that I would say there would be war crimes. When I went out of prison, I didn't know what end of me was up. Your parents know you're acting sort of, because I was a single man, fortunately for me when I came in. A lot of others had families, but I found myself doing strange things about the house, and it was only when it was drawn to my attention that I was doing these things that I had to get myself out of that routine.
Yeah, because you were institutionalised, obviously.
In terms of prisoners being in cells, you had walkers, you had thinkers, you had sleepers, you know, and there's all sorts of descriptions that are put on various prisoners. I mean, some prisoners can sleep all day, some prisoners continually walk all day, and some prisoners just sit and think and ponder what's going on around them.
And which were you?
I was all three. I couldn't really sleep because there's all sorts of reasons why you don't sleep. At 8 o'clock, when the screws went off, you kind of breathed a sigh of relief, because you knew then that obviously any beatings that you sort of made have been due, or sort of you're going to be all right then till the next morning. And if you suffered from any form of cold or flu, you didn't keep it to yourself. I was listening to Plum talking earlier about the compounds where here you spread the good news, because if one had it, then everyone should have it, is the way we looked at it here. The only time sort of you went out of this room was if you were wing shifted or you were going on a visit. I'd say that you were in here 24/7.
So no exercise at all?
None whatsoever. Which is obviously why sort of a lot of ex-prisoners would have difficulty talking about the experience that they endured in here. And the only other time you get out of the cell was on a Sunday to go to Mass. And what would happen was the screws would come round on the Sunday morning, open the door and throw a couple of pairs of pants, and you wore the prison trousers. And you enjoyed getting out to go to Mass, to see your mates, to see what way they were, to see what shape they were in. And some Republicans wouldn't even put the pants on in order to go to Mass, so you never ever seen them for long enough, you know. So very, very difficult times, very difficult times.
Well, Sean, now that you're back in the prison, looking back on things, do you think everything that you went through was worth it?
I think it was, because in terms of today, a generation hasn't had to go to prison. We are where we are today in terms of the peace process, which I think things are looking fairly positive on the political front. So the fact that we went to prison when we did means that a generation hasn't had to come through the same experience that we have. So yeah, I believe it was worth it.
When I come in here and I'm standing here with Sean doing a programme about the prison, when I think of all the thousands of people that went through these prisons and the thousands of people that died, I don't think it was worth it. You know, I think it was too much suffering, too much pain inflicted by both communities, or both sides, or whatever. I'm going to sit and think about the thousands of people who went through this system and the brutality and the suffering. I don't think it was worth it. I don't think it was worth one life on either side.
Obviously, the Republican mindset would be a lot more committed, probably, to the conflict. Would you agree with that?
Lloyd has reacted to IRA violence as I see it. I'm not talking about the state, I'm talking about ordinary loyalists, working class people. And I think we're getting embroiled in a conflict. You know, so, I mean, we weren't sitting down saying we want this or we want that, because our position was that it was there and that we were part of the UK. But as I say, I was in prison first when I was 17 and 18. And as I say, when I think what life I could have had, hadn't I got involved, or troubles hadn't erupted at that time, yeah, you know, I look back and regret, and I think about all the young people, because the majority of people who come into prison were young people. And in the compound system, 90% of the people were under 25. You know, and I've seen that the vast majority of people that were in prison were between 18 and 25 years of age, all young men, and they lost the best years of their lives. Mm-hmm. You know, so I personally, now I'm thinking back on all that suffering and pain, I don't think it was worth it.
I can understand what you're saying when you're saying you don't think it was worth it. But I mean, given what I've said and what I'm a product of, in my opinion,
yeah.
I mean, if you take, for example, I was denied employment. Personally, I was denied employment because I was a Catholic. The first cop who was shot dead on the Shankill Road.
Yes.
In 1966, the first Catholic was shot dead by Gusty Spence.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, I mean, there's, in terms of where this conflict's coming from, I mean, them was things that I wasn't aware of. 1966, I would have been 9.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I remember vaguely remember my father saying about Peter Ward being shot dead in the Malvern Arms. I certainly remember Arbuckle being shot dead in 1969.
I was reading that day when Arbuckle was shot dead, you know. But
so in terms of my life as a nationalist, I mean, I perceived myself very, very quickly in terms of the treatment that I was receiving at the hands of British soldiers who had come onto the streets, and the cops were treating me, as I seen it, as a second-class citizen. Yeah. So there was a lot of rights that I didn't have.
But equally, as well as Arbuckle being the first policeman that was shot dead in the Shankill, the first petrol bombers that were shot dead by the British Army were shot dead in the Shankill. So there's a lot of the acrimonies are funny situations, or ironic situations. But I wouldn't get into an argument about who is or who isn't. Right? You know, I'm not going to get into that. But I do believe now that I'm a European. Mm-hmm. I believe that the world's moved on now. I think that the conflict that we fought in belongs in the last century. That we're moving into Europe with no borders. We're going to have the same currency. Everybody's going to end up having the same currency. And you'll be an economic bloc fighting against other economic blocs. So to me, the conflict that we were involved in is irrelevant now. And that's my view. At this point in life, I don't see Northern Ireland or Southern Ireland. I just see that we're part of Europe. We're Europeans.
Well, if there's any consensus we can come to, it's that there's a lot of history here in the Maze prison, and it'll be interesting to see what final use it's put to.
Well, I would agree with that. And the fact that we're standing here together today talking about it.
Yeah.